Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for having me today. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you about infectious diseases, which is the stuff that I do. From the very first moment we come to this life, and even before, we are faced with this big cloud of microbes that include bacteria, viruses, and so many other things. They are literally everywhere, on our hands, faces, inside our guts. Some of them are useful, many others are not, and we've been fighting those nasty ones for a long time. Very early on, humans have realized that fighting infectious diseases can be only achieved through collaborative effort, because microbes do not speak the geographic borders. I've been interested in trying to understand how the global health governance system evolved, how we, as citizens of this world, came together and decided that we should work in synchrony to fight infectious diseases. It all started with this microbe called Vibrio cholera. It caused 7 pandemics that started in Asia and moved all the way to Europe, killing millions of people. It was very interesting for me to learn that Egypt, my home country, had a central role to play. It was actually the most common source of infection to Europe because of its geographic location. So people and traders moving from Asia to Europe had to cross Egypt. Before the Suez Canal, they had to cross a piece of land. After the Suez Canal, the volume of movement of people and goods and infections has increased significantly. So representatives from certain world countries came together and held 8 international conferences, starting back in 18 all the way up to 1903, to discuss what measures should be implemented to combat the cholera pandemics. There was a debate about whether cholera is an infectious disease or not. Quarantine was one of the measures that countries as a natural decision, but who didn't like that? Britain. Because at that time, Britain was leading the world trade industry, and quarantine caused delays to their ships and lost them money. So they actually were not happy about quarantine. During these conferences, they were discussing, there was the contagionists who believed that cholera is an disease, against the anti-contagionists who believed that cholera just came from the environment. And that continued until Robert Koch came in 1885 and discovered the cause of cholera and established its infectious nature, leading to the establishment of the first Global Health Institute in Paris in 1907, which eventually evolved to the WHO in 1948. So what do we learn from this is that the movement of people was the major factor that drove different countries, different people from everywhere to come together and work and strike. How does people's movement look like these days? Much, much bigger. We have about 1 billion people traveling every year. And the list of infectious diseases keeps expanding. Here on this map, I'm showing you examples of viral infections just because I'm a virologist, but I'm sure that the picture is much, much bigger than that. So these viruses are evolving all the time. They keep changing, and they are exposed to selection pressure. We also, as humans, we are increasing the interface where we get exposed to pathogens that we have never seen before. Sometimes all these factors come together and click, releasing a new beast. This actually happened very recently in Arabia, where we have witnessed the emergence of a novel human coronavirus, or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is believed to have jumped to us from camels. Actually, the story behind the discovery of this virus is quite interesting. Egyptian doctor called Zaki, who was working in a private hospital in Jeddah. I had the pleasure of interviewing him, and that was published in Nature Middle East. Very briefly, we had this highly committed guy who was faced with a mysterious case of illness who died very quickly. And if it wasn't for his curiosity, it could have gone completely ignored. But he undertook the initiative to investigate, and he did some preliminary tests that did not give him a confirmed diagnosis. And he ended up sending some of his samples to a lab. However, his move was viewed by the authorities as breach of rules. He lost his job, he went back home, and American and European scientists to do the research. Actually, every time I remember this story, I cringe. Because if he had access to a regional lab that's qualified to deal with these things, I think the trajectory of this story would have been completely different. MERS started to spread in many other countries. That sparked reoccurring waves of concerns because Saudi Arabia organizes one of the biggest mass gathering events in the entire world. Thank goodness, over the last few years, 3 years actually, nothing happened due to MERS. However, during the last Hajj, we have seen a stampede that killed more people in one day, more than what MERS did in 3 years. And we all blame it on viruses. Our problems do not stop at Saudi Arabia and MERS. We currently have a civil war in Syria. It had catastrophic effects on the healthcare infrastructure. Hospitals are destroyed, doctors are fleeing, we have a shortage of supply of vaccines, and that had manifested itself in the form of a flare of infections. For example, polio, which has been eradicated in Syria in the mid-90s, is now coming back. This is not a problem of the Syrians, because we're witnessing the exodus of millions of refugees everywhere. Egypt has the highest incidence of hepatitis C infection. It's costing the country around $3 billion every year. It's also endemic for avian influenza infections. It has recorded the highest number of human infections of H5N1. These viruses are evolving, and recent studies are suggesting that they are evolving toward becoming more human transmissible. This is not Egypt's problem. It's everybody's problem, because they can move anywhere. Actually, Bill Gates puts it really nicely in one of his insightful articles. The most in the history of human race. One of his models predicted that a flu pandemic could kill more than 30 million people in just 250 days. Where are the majority of these going to happen? Also, modeling studies tell us that they are going to happen in the developing world. Middle East included, of course. We have also learned that disease epidemics come with a hefty economic. Up to 300 billion. So know that disease epidemic is a humanitarian crisis. One of the terms that surfaced recently after the outbreak in West Africa to describe kids who lost both of their parents for the disease. So why do all of that? Actually, because I want to introduce you to an ambitious dream that has been chasing me for a while. I'm sure that it had crossed the mind of any other to work in the same field. A pan-Arab Center for Infectious Disease Control in the Middle East. What is it going to do? It's going to be a center of excellence for infectious disease research. It's going to undertake surveillance and early detection of diseases. It's going to house qualified teams who could be deployed for outbreak response and investigation. Prescribe recommendations to makers, and it will foster long-term collaboration both regionally and internationally, and it will disseminate knowledge, spread awareness, and verify rumors that being circulated through media outlets. And it will train future scientists. So what do we need if this dream will ever materialize? Well, first of all, logo. And I have done it for you guys, so we have a logo. Well, in fact, we will face three major challenges. Is obviously money. While I was preparing those slides, this post from Business Insider popped up in my face while I was browsing my news feed on Facebook. Yes, 5 of the most wealthiest nations on earth exist in the Middle East. So I don't think money is an issue. We have government provide the jumpstart funds. Sustenance could rely on government funds, could rely on grants from international organizations, philanthropic foundations, etc. The second challenge is we have a lot of them. Actually, in this room right now. I view the Middle East, I'm an infectious disease researcher, and I look at the Middle East as an unopened treasure box. There are lots and lots of unexplored opportunities. The third and most difficult challenge, in my point of view, is going to be politics. I really like this cartoon from the Boston Globe, which depicts politics in the Middle East. A big mess. How can you establish a non-political, completely independent entity that has the green light to operate? Dr. Lashwell is shaking. Has a green light to operate in synchrony with local authorities. That's the $6 million question. The model is new. Europeans did it. There is a European Center for Disease Control, and currently there are plans to establish an African CDC in Ethiopia. So, we help you. Leave you with guys. If politics divide us, humanity should unite us. And thanks very much for your attention.